Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Okay, so today's video is going to be on sharpening, okay? And I think the last video I shot, or one of the last ones I shot, was my path to learning how to sharpen my own chainsaw chains. I've run a chainsaw for quite a while, I don't know, 10, 15 years, but mostly sporadically, so, I'd take a chainsaw up to elk camp, and cut the firewood for the wood stove for the tents up there. And, do some light trimming, here and there, around the house, or, handyman and stuff like that. But never like really, like spending all day on a saw type of deal. And lately I've been having to do some of that work. And so I ended up having to teach myself how to sharpen a chainsaw chain. And I did that by finding Buck and Billy Ray Smith, his channel on YouTube, and he's got a whole bunch of sharpening videos, and I just kept going through them and kept practicing until it finally clicked and I could sharpen. Well, in that video I kind of got to thinking, that's an awful lot where I think an awful lot of folks are at when it comes to knife sharpening. Okay, so what I was doing with a chainsaw was my first chainsaw was a Husqvarna 345, 16-inch bar, nice little kind of all-around saw, right? Well, I'd buy a new chain for it, and then I'd use that chain, and then when it got dull, typically I would push it a little bit too far, just keep pushing harder on the saw, and then the saw would kind of heat up and things just wouldn't go all that right. Then I had a couple of different jigs, one that is hooked up to a Dremel tool, a couple of files with like angle guides and stuff on them, but I didn't really realize or didn't really understand what I was doing with each individual tooth, and so I really didn't get all that great of results. Sometimes I would sharpen it and it would get a little bit sharper, and then I would cut with it for a little bit longer, and then it would go dull again. I'd try to sharpen it again. Maybe that time it didn't get any sharper, and then so I'd just swap the chains out and to a fresh factory chain, basically cut with that one till it went dull, and then kind of try to get it sharp again, and then fail miserably and get another chain and just keep on going, right? Honestly, I'd have been money ahead to buy a new chain, use it till it got dull, put another new chain on, use it till it got dull. Which is really, really wasteful when you think about it. So kind of going through all that stuff in my head, I got to thinking, and I thought, well, you know what? That's kind of where an awful lot of people are with their knives, be it a pocket knife or a kitchen knife or hunting knife, work knife, pretty much anything, right? Which is why those folding, they're like a lock back knife that accepts utility blades. The type of blade that goes in these. So when it gets dull, pull it out, pop a new one in, and you're back in business, right? No need to learn how to sharpen. Well, except for that's kind of a really limited, size of blade. But anyway, so I thought I would go over what happens when you learn how to sharpen your own knife, okay? Now, most of my videos, I'm suggesting you grab one of these, a Norton crystalline, coarse fine, combination stone. You can get these off of Amazon for like 20 bucks. I know I can get them here locally in town at the local Murdoch's Ranch and Supply House. I want to say they're a little bit higher, maybe $30. One of these stones and some mineral oil, whether it be wooden bamboo cutting board oil. You could use baby oil from like Walmart, all that stuff. Just, my God, the smell of that stuff brings back horrible memories, and I just don't care for that. But they do make other mineral oil at Walmart. And some guys use soap and water, whatever. But basically a simple stone and oil, or like Dawn and water. Okay, so about as simple and as easy as you can get. No guides, no fixtures, no nothing. A stone, a knife, and the person holding the two of them to bring them together, along with a fluid for the stone, be it oil or soap and water. So anyway, we're going to start off with this knife right here. This is my everyday carry knife. This is, I made this one. I started making liner locks about a year ago or so. I haven't been getting a whole lot of time in the shop lately, so I haven't been able to to put out more than a couple of these onto the website or for sale. But you know, this is a liner lock. This particular one's out of 1095 and 15N20 pattern welded steel, 250-ish layers on the blade, 110-ish layers on the bolsters, just so you get a nice boulder type pattern. Cowbone scales, stainless pocket clip. This one has got, I can't remember the grade of stainless, but stainless steel liners instead of titanium. I was playing with that. Dual thumb studs and a flipper. So you get the flipper, you know, protects your thumb when you go to close it. Then you can pop it open with the flipper or hit the thumb studs, either way. So this is my everyday carry knife. Has been since I started making them. My knife before this was the Benchmade 940. This one right here, it's got a blade that I made for it out of basically the same stuff. I want to say it's a 300 or 400 layerish Damascus. But anyways, I'm not one of those guys that carries, you know, that rotates everyday carry knives. I'd much rather have the same knife or the same pattern with the same action for a long time. I mean, I carried these 940s here. I had a review on them that said it was a 10+ year review. I want to say I carried these for 15 years or so. This one or another one just like it was in my pocket nearly every day for 15 years. Now, this one right here, which has replaced it, will probably be in my pocket for another 15 years. Because I like developing muscle memory, you know, so that the knife is always there. It's always in the same spot. It always opens and closes the same. And that way your hand gets trained, you know, to use that particular knife. So if you ever have to use the knife fast or in a stressful situation, your hand and your knife, both of them work together and get your work done, right? Okay, so let's, dang it, I got this new lock on my phone, and so when it, you know, I've got notes here. So, what happens when you learn how to sharpen your own knife? First of all, you lose the fear of dulling your knife, okay? So in the same case as with the chainsaw, you know, you put a new chain on, well, you're going to baby that edge because, you know, that chain, because you don't know how to sharpen it, and a new chain is going to cost you 20 bucks, right? So you're going to baby that thing, and you might not get the full range of use out of it because you're so scared of getting it dull. Then once it does go dull, now you're pretty much looking to find somebody who can sharpen it for you, or just working with a dull knife. That's where we're at on this one, okay? So the other day I was replacing a light fixture over a vanity in a bathroom. It had quit working. Replaced the bulbs, still didn't work. Hit it with my, you know, the little doohickey that you, it's a non-contact electrical tester. So you push the button and then you hold it up to an outlet to check it, and it'll beep really, really fast. And then you pull it away and it won't beep really fast. So I put it on the little things up there, and it beeped saying I had electricity, right? So I swapped out the bulbs, still no light. Thought, huh, that's kind of odd. So I replaced the fixture. Put new bulbs in it, flipped on the switch, still no light. Thought, now that's really strange. Replaced the switch, still no light. Ended up finding a couple of wires loose in a horribly put together junction box. So I ended up redoing all of that, putting it back together, and then finally I got light and everything was working the way it was supposed to. But in the process, I wrecked the edge on my everyday carry knife, okay? Where the wires came out of the wall, it's not to code, but that's the way it was. The hole didn't line up with the hole in the fixture, okay? And it was drywall over plaster, okay? So pretty much, you know, I had my pocket knife with me, so I grabbed the knife and I, you know, widened that hole up. Well, I ended up hitting a couple of screws, which, you know, I invariably do. So that wrecked the or most of the edge to begin with. Well, then when I went to go up into the attic, the access panel for the attic was painted over, and the paint had dried, and, you know, painted it stuck. So then I had to grab the knife and, you know, rake through all those layers of paint to be able to free that panel up so that I could get up in the attic. So the edge has, I mean, it'll still cut, but here's some newspaper. Now, of course, that makes it look like it's still sharp, right? But it's not. I mean, there we go. The edge is folded over. The point is kind of sort of still sharp. I mean, the edge has been wrecked, right? So we're going to go ahead and finish it back, or clean it up. Anyway, so when you learn how to sharpen your own knife, first of all, you lose the fear of that knife going dull because you can sharpen it back up any time you need to. So what I'm doing here is we got that. We're just going to go on the fine side because while it wrecked the edge, it didn't take like any big divots out. Well, actually, let's see if you can see that. See all that light reflecting off of the edge? I mean, it's in rough shape, but we don't need anything more than just the fine side of this stone. And it won't take us very long at all. So anyway, so first of all, you lose your fear of having a dull knife because you know you can sharpen it back up at any time that you need to, as long as you have access to your stone. Okay? So here what I'm doing is I'm just working one side until I start to kind of pick up a burr on the other side. Then we're going to work the other side until I pick up a burr on the other side. Then we'll even the burr out. Then we'll prep the burr for removal. Almost there. Then we'll remove the burr, and then we'll have a sharp knife again. And it just takes just that amount of time. Almost there. Need a little bit more work up on the belly. So anyway, so you lose your fear of dull knives because you can fix them anytime you want to. The second thing that happens when you learn how to sharpen your own knife and you start sharpening your own knife is now you know what it takes. You start learning that edge a lot more. Okay, so you start learning what the edge can do and what the edge can't do, and you start realizing what sharp is and what dull is. Okay, which seems kind of simple, but back to the whole chainsaw analogy, I would put a fresh chain on and I would cut with it, and boy, a fresh chain cuts really, really nice. Well, then, I might cut a little bit with that chain, and then when it started to go dull, I was done with my work, so then I put the saw up. So the next time I pulled that saw out, the edge of the chain was mostly dull, but I didn't have an immediate thing to compare sharp versus dull against, right? So I thought it was still, somewhat okay. So of course, you cut with it and it doesn't cut all that well. So you put more pressure behind it to get it to cut. And then, you just you don't get the right feel for it, right? Well, the same thing happens with a knife. So we abraded this side until we picked up a burr on this side. Now we abraded this side till we picked up a burr on this side. Now I did it kind of in half stages just to conserve, steel. But anyway, so now we got that burr established on this side here. So now what I'm going to do is refine the burr and weaken it and get it ready to get it removed. So anyway, so once you know how to sharpen your own knife, you will sharpen it more often. So when it quits cutting right, instead of just forcing it through your work, chances are you're going to go ahead and you're going to stop and you're going to make the thing sharp again. Okay, so when that happens, now you take an awful lot of stress off of that knife. Okay, because a sharp knife cuts so much more efficiently than a dull knife does. Same thing with a chainsaw. Okay, you take a sharp knife and start making cuts with it, and it doesn't put very much stress on the edge or the steel behind the edge because the knife slips through your work so easily, right? Okay, so I got the burr prepped and ready to remove, and you see I flooded the top of my stone to get rid of all the loose stone particles and the loose steel particles, so that now I can remove that burr on a clean stone. All right, so to remove the burr, if this was your sharpening angle, you'll almost double that, and very light pressure, just enough pressure to get the stone to cut, you take a pass. And that should move that burr to the other side. You do that 2 or 3 or 4 times until you don't feel the burr anymore. Maybe touch up some little spots. And away we go. Now we've got a sharp edge. Nice and sharp, right? Okay, so now we got a nice sharp edge again, ready for more service. We fold that thing up. The pivot feels pretty good, like it doesn't need any more oil, so back in the pocket it goes, ready for more work. Okay, so where was I? Okay, yeah, so when you have a sharp knife and you go to cut a piece of rope, okay, or a piece of cardboard or whatever, that sharp edge is going to cut with a lot less force than a dull one is, right? So since you're putting less force into that cut, not only is the cut going to be safer for you because the knife cuts when it's supposed to, not when you put so much force behind it that the material just gives up and gets sheared apart, right? Okay, so it's safer. The steel behind the edge does not get as much stress put on it because the knife is cutting when it's supposed to and not just mashing through whatever it is that you're trying to cut, right? Okay, so it's much easier on the knife, not only fixed blades, but also folding blades, right? Folding blades have got locking mechanisms and such. All right, you start having to put more force in there, chances are likely that you twist a little bit in that cut. Now you're putting sideways pressure on that locking mechanism, and it's probably not such a good thing for it. Okay, so it's much easier on the knife. You lose your fear of dull knives. You start learning to appreciate the edge, what the edge can do, and what state it's in. So you know, like when I pulled that pocket knife out, or this knife out, I told you, I said, hey, this is dull, right? Because, you know, I wrecked the edge doing work. Once that edge gets dull, now you start to appreciate the difference between sharp and dull. And that's a big advantage to being able to learn your knife and what it can do and what it can't do. Less stress on the hands and the wrists. Okay, so not only do you have less stress on the edge and the locking mechanism, but now there's much less stress on your wrist and on your hand when you're working because the knife is cutting efficiently. Think about a chef, okay? Now I'm not talking like a home chef unless you're, you know, cooking for a really big family, but say a production chef, right? Somebody that works at a restaurant. Let's say that person has got to cut up, you know, 3 boxes, you know, of potatoes in an 8-hour shift. All right, well, if they're cutting up that many dang potatoes, if you can reduce the amount of force that they have to put on that knife to get through each potato by 2 ounces, that's really going to add up over the course of that shift, right? Now, what you do for work might be, you know, not cutting potatoes. You might be cutting rope, or you might be, you know, working like I was, you know, where you pretty much you wreck an edge way before you wear it out. Well, so now you can, you know, either carry a rough use knife. That's the one that you use for stuff like that, and sharpen up once a day or once a week or whatever, and then keep a nice sharp edge in your pocket for stripping wire, insulation off a wire, or opening up boxes, or you know, cutting open packages, or, you know, whatever it is that you do on a daily basis. If you're a butcher, or you know, a trapper or something like that, you know, where you're cutting hides or processing meat all day long, same thing there. You know, the lower you can get the force that you have to put through each cut, at the end of the day, that will really add up to an awful lot of stress on your hands and wrists. And that goes in with more efficient work, right? Okay, so one of my big stories is how I learned to like these really coarser edges, right? Where I had a cowboy. Well, I didn't have the cowboy. I mean, I went to something called Cheyenne Frontier Days here in town, and there was a cowboy that was doing some roping. Anyway, so his horse got tangled up in a rope, and he went open up his pocket knife to cut that rope, and the rope wouldn't cut. Now those are real hard plasticky type ropes, but the rope had an awful lot of force on it. It was caught in between. He'd roped a calf, 400-pound calf. The calf was on the ground, and the other end was attached to his saddle. Well, the horse was backing up, and so there was, those horses are 1,000 pounds plus, so there's, a whole bunch of tension on this rope. Well, the rope was wrapped around the horse's foreleg. So he goes to cut this rope, and his knife wouldn't cut the rope. And so he proceeded to saw and hack and just mutilate that rope until finally the rope parted. Now, they didn't say, if his horse got hurt or anything like that, but boy, in a situation like that where a second can seem like an eternity, an efficient blade that cuts when you need it to cut because it's sharp, because you sharpened it, and, you put the kind of edge that works best in your day-to-day work, man, that could have been the difference between a horse with a broken leg or, a horse with, just a clean and simple break, or a break and then the rope, it broke the leg, and then the rope could have, continued to pull on the broken part. Now the bone's sticking up out of the hide, risk of infection, probably losing a couple $1,000 horse. Difference between a sharp edge and a dull edge and the efficiency of your work is huge. Now, one of the last things is what comes with repeated sharpening. Okay, as you work with a knife and you sharpen that knife, now you can start to adjust your angles and your finish grits. Okay, this is where I'm at in chainsaw sharpening. Okay, I can take a new chain, put it on a chainsaw, go ahead and cut with it. Once it starts to go dull, I can notice that it's starting to go dull, and then go ahead and pull out the files and lean over the saw on the back of on the tailgate on a pickup truck, and go ahead and bring that chainsaw back, or chain, I can go ahead and sharpen the chain to where it cuts as good as the factory edge that was on it. Okay? And then I can go ahead and use that chain again, and then when it gets dull, I can come back, and I can keep that chain sharp throughout the life of the chain. Now that right there is what I call a working knowledge of being able to sharpen a chainsaw. Call it a journeyman level, if you will. Okay? So I can take a sharp chain, I can dull it, and I can make it sharp again, and I can dull it, and I can keep doing that until the chain itself is wore out. Now the next step, which is what you'll find with chainsaw chains and knives and scissors and anything else, is being able to say, okay, well, I can put this back to pretty close to a factory edge. Now what happens if I thin the edge out a little bit, or if I thicken the edge a little bit, or if I use a different grit to finish the edge? That right there is when you really get to know your knife. Okay, so I just finished this one on a Norton crystalline fine side, right? Okay, with micro bevels. All right, what you saw me, that was when you shear the burr off at a little bit higher angle than your sharpening angle. So this is a 300 grit-ish edge with micro bevels. Now I know from experience that edge works good for me and the work that I typically do with a knife. Okay, you might decide that that's a little bit coarse of an edge for your tastes. Okay, maybe you're that chef and you're push cutting through potatoes all day. Well, a push cut through a potato doesn't really require as coarse or as toothy of an edge as, say, cutting rope. So you might decide that you like 1,000 or a 6,000 grit Waterstone finish on your knife, and you want it at either you want it at a lower angle or you want it at a thicker angle because maybe you're not the only one using the knife and your coworker has a tendency to slam the edge into the cutting board. You want that edge a little bit thicker to resist some of that damage. But that's the correlation to that would be with the chainsaw. Okay, with that chain, if this right here is your bar, your kind of standard sharpening angle is going to be here. Well, what happens in the winter time? Okay, when the sap is down in the wood and the wood's a little bit harder. Well, it might like an angle like this. Or in the springtime, you know, when the sap's flowing really easy, you might be able to get away with an angle like this. What type of wood you're cutting, whether you're cutting pine or whether you're cutting cottonwood, you know, I mean, and that's kind of where I'm starting to be with a chainsaw chain, is starting to notice a little bit of differences like that. You'll notice the same thing in sharpening your knife. And, you know, through trial and error, you'll find out that, hey, this is the grit you like, and this is, you know, your sharpening style that you like, right? Dang it, I just had something else. So another thing that happens when you learn how to sharpen your own knife, let's say you get a stone and you just want to sharpen your pocket knife with it, right? Well, it won't be too long before you're thinking, before you get used to having a sharp edge on your pocket knife and you realize, hey, them kitchen knives need some work. So the next thing you know, you sharpen and you practice on your kitchen knives, and boy, your food prep in the kitchen goes way faster. Well, that won't be long before that, before you find out that, hey, you know, you got a pair of scissors that's really dull now that you know what a sharp edge is. So you learn how to sharpen scissors. Well, then you jump to, you know, a handsaw. Now, a handsaw and a chainsaw are, you know, sharpened with files, not with stones. But a lot of the principles stay the same and transfer from, you know, tool to tool, or chisels, or a chopper or machete or something. Maybe you do, you know, you do trimming work with a machete sometimes, garden shears, you know, all that sort of stuff. So once you start, and the thing is that the folks that make the, you know, the whiz-bang laser-guided sharpening systems, where you've got a clamp that clamps on the back of the blade, and you've got, you know, guides and everything to sharpen. You know, it seems to me like those folks want to make sharpening really, really hard so that you buy their product, right? Which, I mean, I guess, you know, I mean, that's you know, capitalism. I mean, that's the way it goes. I mean, everybody's got to make a living. But, you know, once you start sharpening on just a stone like this, you'll start learning how easy it is, and, you know, you won't need all that extra fancy stuff. I mean, you'll still need somebody to sell you a stone, and you'll still need somebody to sell you, you know, mineral oil and everything. But man, life just gets so much easier with a sharp knife. And then once you start getting used to a sharp knife, then everything else in, you know, every other tool that you work with that needs sharpening, you'll end up learning how to sharpen that too. And the rest of your work will get so much easier. Now, I know some folks are going to say, well, okay, but I'm not that great at sharpening. Okay, well, here's what my opinion on that whole thing, right? If you take a knife and it is dull, and you work that thing on a stone for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes or for, you know, a minute and a half or whatever, and when you get done, that knife cuts better than what it did before, then that means you're a good sharpener, okay? There's no competitions. Well, I mean, I guess there are probably competitions out there somewhere, but I'm certainly not competing with you, okay? So if I sell you a knife and you enjoy that initial edge, and then you sharpen it and your edge isn't as good as my edge was, who cares, okay? You know, I mean, I'm not competing with you. I mean, it's not like, you know, hey, the guy with the best edge is going to win $50, all right? The whole point is that, you know, you learn how to sharpen your tool. The more you sharpen, the better you will get, okay? So, let's say worst case scenario, right? Let's say you got something like this, Victorinox 8-inch chef's knife, right? And it's been banging in your drawer with 10 other knives that were all dull, and so you ended up buying new ones, right? And that edge is just, oh my God, there's just hardly anything there, okay? And you can see light reflecting the whole length of the edge, and we're talking a lot of light, like that amount of light, right? You spend 5 minutes on that stone abrading part of the edge away, and then you look down at the light, and if used to, or look down at the light reflecting off the edge, and when you started, if you could see that much light, and when you finished you can see half that much light, guess what? That knife is way sharper than what it was before you started, okay? Or what happens if you're getting hung up on burr removal, okay? Let's say you can you can get this knife and you can abrade this side until you feel a burr on this side, and then you abrade this side until you feel a burr on this side, and then you kind of start weakening the burr up a little bit. But then by that point, you know, you've been there for 15 minutes and your hand's getting tired and you can't hold the same angle and it kind of goes all wonky on you. Well, guess what? Now you've got an edge that went to a burr, and now even if that burr just breaks off or folds over a little bit, chances are you're going to be sharper than that, or half that amount of light. Okay? So then you use that knife until it quits cutting the way you want it to, and then the next day you try it again, and the next day you try it again, and the next day you try it again. I bet you by the time you try it 10 times, all of a sudden it'll click and you'll be like, oh, I was using too much force when I was trying to remove the burr, or I wasn't using enough force when I was trying to remove the burr, or I wasn't holding it at a steep enough angle, or I was holding it at too steep of an angle. I promise you, at some point it'll all click, and I bet you it happens a lot faster than what you think it will. Once that clicks, and you know, okay, burr, weaken, refine the burr, and then remove the burr, right after that, now all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, okay, well now you practice, and 8 out of 10 of your edges come up just gorgeous. Well, now you keep practicing and you try to pick up them other 2 edges, right? But since you can sharpen your own knife, it really doesn't matter all that much, because now you're self-sufficient on maintaining or getting and maintaining sharp edges on your knife. Okay? So, you know, my phone went to the lock screen again and I don't have my notes, but I'm pretty sure I got through all of that, right? Okay, so learning to sharpen your own knife. Yeah, actually I will. We'll do a recap. Okay, when you learn how to sharpen your own knife, or when you even start learning how to sharpen your own knife, you lose your fear of dull knives, or dull scissors, or dull axes, or dull machetes, or whatever, right? Then you start to appreciate a sharp knife versus a dull knife. You can take a sharp knife, use it until that edge starts to go away, and then bring it back to sharp. Okay? Then you can learn how far you can push a dull edge, or when you really need to sharpen it. Or when you want that high initial sharpness, you can go back, you know, maybe you're doing a job that requires, you know, high sharpness throughout the whole job. So you can keep your stone handy and maintain that high sharpness throughout the whole job that you need. It's easier on the knife because you're not putting near as much force through the cuts. So all the steel behind the edge and the remaining edge stays sharper longer. Okay? It's easier on the mechanics of, say, a folding knife, okay? Because now instead of pushing and then maybe tilting and putting stress on the pivot, now it's cutting nice and easy when you want it to cut. And thereby it's safer because it cuts when you want it to, instead of push, and then all of a sudden it slips or finally goes through, and now you've got all this extra force going beyond your cut that sometimes is not as controllable as a nice controlled clean cut. Less stress on your hands and wrists, you know, especially in production cutting. You know, every ounce of stress or every ounce of force that you can remove from that cut will really add up over the course of a shift, or you know, 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. More efficient work. That's kind of what we just went over. Once you start to get to the journeyman level of being able to sharpen a knife or scissors or whatever, now you can start to adjust your sharpening angles and your grit of your finished stone to suit the work that you do the most. Which, at that point, hey, getting the knife sharp is probably about 80% of the game, okay? That final 20% is getting the knife sharp at whatever angle you like, whatever angle the steel can support, and whatever grit finish that you like. Okay, just taking taking your old beat up kitchen knife and turning the edge from reflecting this amount of light to half that amount of light, like say that amount of light. You should be able to see the difference. You know, this cardstock right here is probably 10 or 15 thousandths, and this newspaper is probably, you know, 3 to 5 thousandths. Well, this is going to cut way better than this will. Okay, so if you can take a knife that's showing this much light and reduce it to a knife that's showing this, or an edge that's showing this much light, hey, you're well on your way to becoming a good sharpener. Okay, and the last thing is that, hey, you guys can do this. Okay, I mean, if you can hold a knife and you can take a sharp knife and use it for the task that it's intended until you wear that edge out or wreck it, if you can physically hold that knife long enough at the right angles to do that, then you can sharpen the knife. If you can brush your teeth without, you know, digging into your gums, or comb your hair without scalping yourself, you've got enough control of your hand that you can sharpen a knife. I know you can. All right. So, and if you have problems, you know, call me, email me, send me a message through Facebook, put a little, you know, comment in the section below, you know, whatever you need. I mean, dull knives are one of my pet peeves. So the more dull knives that we can, like, make sharp again, the happier I am. Okay, so this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you don't already have a stone and some oil, pick one up, start practicing. You'll find it is a lot easier than what you've been led to believe. Just pick up the stone, the oil, and then start practicing, and you will get it. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.